explanations, and evidences so as to inspire and change the lives of our younger giant generation. If I have said or translated anything against Jinagya, then Michhami Dukram. Pranam.
Bharat Ratna Professor C. N. Rao. In this slide, you can see the President of Scientific Advisory Board of Prime Minister, Professor Chintamani Nagesh Ramchandra Rao, the prominent scientist of nanotechnology, who was awarded Bharat Ratna along with Sachin Tendulkar recently. Professor C. N. Rao is well known in nanotechnology. He has published around 1500 research papers and 125 books. This examination was conducted by Sanghvi Laboratory, Ghatkopar East, Mumbai. Sri Rohit Bhai Sanghvi has made all the slides shown here in this laboratory. Microscopic examinations were done by Sri Madhubhai Sanghvi, and video clips such that it can be shown on computer were taken by Dr. Saumil Sanghvi. They have not taken any charge for this extremely excellent task. All of these were done pro bono. They have done this job only as a benefit to mankind, Jain and non-Jain alike. The whole society is devoted to them. We are also indebted to all scientists, doctors who have taken an interest in this work. I have shown only 10 items in our presentation due to limit of time. Even we have tasted more than 30 items, and its presentation is, you can see in the break, lunch break, on our stall, research stall outside.
Now we'll go to the next speaker. We have a Professor Dr. Robert Z. Sidombos from Germany. He specialized in Indian philosophy and religion. He has published 60 research papers and 5 books. He has received honorary title of Vidya Sagar at World Sanskrit Conference in 1997. He is on the editorial board of International Journal of Jain Studies. May I invite Professor Dr. Robert J. Zabedos.
Moksha margasya netaram, betaram karma bhubratam, nyataram sarvatattvanam mande tadguna labdaye. Ladies and gentlemen, I will speak here today as a historian of philosophy and a student of Indian culture, who for the past 15 years has been teaching as a professor of Indology at the University of Munich, the largest and foremost university in Germany. In the context of the present conference, a discussion of the image, the popular perception of Jaina, and more generally, Indian philosophical thought is appropriate. Because, why is it appropriate? Because what today has come to be known as the basic mentality of science, or as I prefer to say, the scientific mindset, is a particular way of viewing the world and life that has come into existence in Western Europe under very specific historical circumstances. The exploration of the universe and of the human self is universal and of all times. However, it is a fact that the natural sciences, as they are practiced worldwide today, follow an intellectual pattern that has developed in 4 countries: France, Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Germany from the 17th century onwards. From there, this mode of thought spread throughout Europe and its cultural satellites, such as the Americas. And through the practical application of these sciences in the form of technology, it is spreading throughout the world, for instance, through IITs. To understand how a modern person with this scientific mindset sees in Indian and Jaina philosophy, it is therefore necessary to understand a few crucial elements in the history of Western European intellectual culture. Or, to say it differently, the cultural dialogue between Jaina philosophy and science is essentially a dialogue between Jaina philosophy and modern Western European philosophy. A much more detailed version of what I will say today will be found in the yet-to-be-published volume of the Proceedings of the Conference. And in the 20 minutes which have been allotted for my talk today, I will limit myself to a few main thoughts. And these are based on my own studies, as well as on my experience of having taught Jainism in Munich for the past 15 years. Now, all science and scholarship is based on data, facts, and the interpretation of those data. Data simply are there. But what we do with those data in our thinking is a matter of philosophical attitude. Which connections do we see between data, but also which data we recognize as valid, and also the questions which we ask. The big existential questions concerning human nature, the essence of being human, the meaning of life, and therefore also questions of ethics, are questions that traditionally were answered by the world's religious traditions. There is, however, a fundamental, radical difference between the traditional European religions and those of classical India. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the so-called Abrahamic religions, which share a common historical root, are revealed religions. God, so it is believed, has spoken to mankind. His words are recorded in scriptures, and they are law. A believer in those religions cannot question those words. He cannot scrutinize them. At best, he can interpret them. To simplify the matter only slightly, because the basic notions of these religions were given as law, they demanded faith and not rational analysis. Throughout the history of Christianity, philosophical inquiry was subordinated under the authority of the Church. The Church claimed for itself an absolute authority concerning all intellectual matters and used a variety of means to silence the voices of free thinkers whenever what these voices said displeased the Church. These means included physical torture and the death penalty. This was possible through manipulating the fears of the uneducated masses. Very importantly, the Church also abused the faith and the trust which the people placed in it. From the 15th century onwards, the so-called Renaissance period, intellectual resistance to churchly authority slowly grew. This intensified in the 17th century, the so-called Enlightenment period, and culminated in 19th century France in a style of philosophy that is known as positivism. And this is the basis of modern science. Positivism should be seen, therefore, as the result of a long rebellion against religious authority. It is fundamentally anti-religious. The successful rebellion of positivism is based on the systematic study of material reality that can be perceived through the senses. Positivism and the sciences which developed out of it were felt by many as a kind of liberation. The study of the material universe had become free, but there were no means for studying the invisible. Typically, the modern Western sciences are rather weak in all fields of inquiry which demand introspection and self-analysis. Here, the traditional religious institutions retained their authority. And because the religious views concerning the self, soul, the meaning of life, questions of the afterlife, etc., simply had to be believed, there never was an urgent need to systematically study the inner life of man. So, to briefly summarize, what is science? It is based on a variety of philosophy known as positivism. It recognizes only materially observable and quantifiable as valid data. And pure science, therefore, has no view of the self or soul. Consciousness remains a mystery, and there is hardly any objective basis for ethical thought. Now, the great strength of the tradition of intellectualism in India is that already at a very early stage of development, roughly 3,000 years ago, the thinking, conscious subject, that is, the mind, the workings of the mind, were the object of very fine and detailed analysis. And for this reason, fields of study such as linguistics, psychology, and mathematics reached a very high level of sophistication long before anything comparable was reached in the West. Typically, the terminology that is found in the Sanskrit language for phenomena of the mind, consciousness, etc., is far more subtle and precise than what one can find in any Western language. But precisely here lies a problem. Indian philosophy has always had the conscious subject at the center of its attention. In other words, something that is invisible and is not objective according to the rules of modern science. Therefore, Indian philosophy is seen in the West as something fundamentally religious, and therefore it is suspect. It is a matter of purely personal faith. For the reasons which I have already given, it is very difficult for most Western thinkers to enter into a dialogue on an equal level with their Indian counterparts concerning questions about the non-material universe. Here we have a serious weakness in Western spiritual culture, which unfortunately has been brutally abused by unscrupulous Indian so-called spiritual masters. The most notorious of all these exploiters is Rajneesh Chandra Mohan Jain, who later called himself Osho. And if you wish to damage the reputation of Jainism as a worldview in the West, you need only to say that Osho was a born Jain. And most likely, any discussion you have will immediately stop. Now, probably I will disappoint my largely Jaina audience when I say that Jainism is hardly known in the West. We must distinguish between the academic interest of researchers in universities, which is largely purely historical, and whatever little has reached the general non-scholarly public. Western academic research into Jainism began at universities in Germany in the 19th century and was historically oriented, which to some extent helped to correct misrepresentations that had reached Europe through the writings of British travelers and Christian missionaries, who depicted Jainism as an eccentric sect of ascetic extremism. Especially the strict implementation of ahimsa by many followers of Jainism was not understood, and therefore was seen as something superstitious. While academic, scholarly interest in Jainism has happily been growing, even though slowly in recent times, one problem in the popular perception of Jainism in the West lies in the self-depiction by well-meaning laypersons of Indian origin who often are unaware of how popular Jaina religious practices are misunderstood by the average Westerner. A religion that apparently consists of little more than vegetarianism and non-violence is seen as useless, also because it is not necessary to become a Jaina in order to be a vegetarian or a pacifist. It is only the totality of Jaina teaching, with its metaphysics, with its ontology and its epistemology, that can convince any outsider to the tradition that Jainism offers a meaningful alternative worldview. Now, after these words about the history and the present state of the image of Jaina and Indian thought in the West, I wish to add my views about how the future could, and according to me, should be. Many problems facing the world today are the result of the objective-subjective split in thinking that is characteristic of modern scientific thought. And that goes back to positivism and still further to the conflict between religious thought and scientific investigation in Western Europe. Scientific investigation divorced itself from introspection and self-analysis, divorced itself from man's inner life. And whether we are dealing with any of the major issues that are facing humanity today, whether it is global warming or overpopulation, the depletion of natural resources, environmental pollution, and numerous other such issues, the root cause of these problems lies not so much in a lack of knowledge in the natural sciences, but in human behavior, and in a lack of understanding of human nature, of the workings of the mind. Here I would like to quote Gandhiji, who said that there is a limit to human need, but not to human greed. The strengths of the Indian intellectual tradition lie in the acceptance of man's inner world as a decisive factor of change. Indian thought has never devalued the study of the mind, quite on the contrary. It has always stood in the center of philosophical thought. Nor has it ever underestimated the significance of the workings of the mind. The realization of the intimate connection between man's inner and outer worlds becomes immediately apparent in, for instance, the karma doctrine. Much of thinking about karma, for instance, what we find in Jaina karma granthas, essentially is psychology. Jainism is not a revealed religion like the Abrahamic religions which I mentioned earlier, those which have originated in Western Asia. And not only that, Jainism is an Anishwaravada, a fundamentally atheistic system of thought in the sense that there is no all-powerful divine being that has created the world, has laid down laws for mankind to follow, will judge humans at the time of their death, and whose statements are beyond questioning by intelligent people. As I have argued in an article several years ago, the religious laws of the West Asian religions are quasi-legalistic laws, whereas the religious laws of a system of thought such as Jainism are quasi-scientific laws. Here it is necessary to emphasize my expression quasi-scientific, because Jainism is not scientific, it is philosophy. But the character of Jaina thought shows some similarities to scientific thinking. The inherent qualities of the jiva need not be merely believed on the authority of Scripture, but, so Jainism tells us, can be experienced through a systematic investigation of human consciousness and a conscious opening to other levels of human subjectivity. And this is experimental and empirical. The results of this exploration of the inner life are, more or less by definition, something that cannot stand the test of objectivity as understood by the natural sciences today. Here lies a weakness in science. However, this inner exploration can be discussed. Even if it is not objective, it is intersubjective. And this intersubjectivity is the basis for an open and impartial discussion. And this is essential for a broader acceptance of Jaina thought as a serious intellectual alternative, exactly as this has been the case in the very wide acceptance of Buddhism in the Western world. If Buddhism is thought to be something scientific or rational in nature, or if Buddhism is seen as a genuine alternative worldview among people whose thinking is characterized by the scientific mindset, this is because Buddhism also is basically atheistic and is seen as a conceptual framework that allows investigation, self-criticism, and open discussion, rather than mere obedience to select persons who are invested with authority by traditional rules that are beyond questioning and investigation. Now, this does not mean that, for instance, Buddhist religious teachers are not respected. On the contrary, many people in the Western world respect them more highly than Christian leaders, precisely because their authority is open to scrutiny. Now, I know I'm now going to say something that is very hard for many Jaina people, but I must say this. It must be understood that the Jaina fixation on food appears quite superstitious to the outside world, and this is also perfectly justified. It is quite clear that Jaina religious teachers in the past have utilized the virtue of ahimsa to persuade less learned and less intellectual laypersons in the Jaina community to follow otherwise very sensible rules. Where the teachers of a theistic religion can simply issue the order, do this because God wants this, this is not possible in an essentially atheistic religion. Here, ahimsa was pressed into use since the Middle Ages, when most of the Shravakachara Granthas were written. It was made to appear that the whole of Jaina ethics is based on ahimsa. However, a sober investigation of Jaina philosophical texts will show that this cannot be true. Jaina ethics are based on something else. They're based on bheda-jnana, on the realization that jiva and ajiva are basically different. And the vow of ahimsa, just as other main vratas, is just one instrument among many to bring about a change in our consciousness. Here I would like to refer to a booklet which appeared several years ago by a Pandit from Rajasthan, Pandit Paramchand Shastri. It was titled Jain Dharma ki Mula Samskriti Aparigraha. He argued that the basic vrata of Jainism is not ahimsa, but aparigraha, and there's actually much to say in favor of this view. Persons who speak in the name of Jainism need to emphasize the reason why ahimsa can occupy such a place of importance in the first place. And this reason is bheda-jnana. And this also explains the meaningfulness of all other vratas. In other words, the whole of the Jaina ethical system. If Jainism is to receive greater attention and acceptance in the outside world, in the Western world, and as we know, this is more or less equivalent to saying acceptance by people with the scientific mindset, then Jainism's essential structural atheism needs to be emphasized. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche pronounced a culturally very profound truth when he said, God is dead. This may not apply to all people, but certainly to the more highly educated and those who have grown up in a culture where science is seen as the only way to knowledge and truth. Modern man cannot accept commands from an imaginary friend in the sky anymore. But he can be rationally convinced of the correctness of views concerning man and the universe. Finally, a worldview that is based on very specific local and historical circumstances and traditions has no chance of being widely accepted in the world, accepted as a valid, viable worldview in a globalizing world. To propagate what is universally good and useful in Jainism, it is essential that modern Jaina thinkers take a few steps back and look at their very rich tradition from a bit of a distance. What is purely traditional has its specific value for people who have grown